Vietnam. Many believe they already know it's war. Huey helicopters cutting through the sky, the thunder of bombardments, jungles set ablaze. But behind the front lines, beneath rain and fire, there was another army. Silent, invisible, made up of women. Along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, more than 138,000 young female volunteers sustained the heartbeat of a divided country, moving between mountains and bullets. In the south, thousands rose up in what became known as the Long-Haired Army, where braids symbolized rebellion and weapons symbolized resistance. While men carried rifles, women dug trenches, transported ammunition, treated the wounded, and rebuilt entire villages under relentless bombing. Their names rarely appeared in textbooks, but their story runs through the very roots of Vietnam's victory. This is the war told through the voices of the women who made it possible. Across the Truong Son Mountains, where jungle swallowed mist and war pressed in from all sides, thousands of young Vietnamese women carried picks, shovels, and fragile dreams. They were known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail volunteers. Their mission was clear: keep open the artery that kept the nation alive while it was torn apart by fire. Most of them were between 17 and 24 years old. They came from rural villages where electricity was barely known. They left behind parents crying in doorways. They did not march for glory, but because they believed independence was worth every drop of sweat.
Their permanent and never-ending mission was to repair, consolidate, build and rebuild the 16,000-kilometer network of roads, paths, bridges and tunnels that made up the legendary Ho Chi Minh Trail.
At the Mu Gia and Aloi passes, every dawn followed the same ritual. Distant explosions, roads ripped open by craters, trees still burning. Nguyen Thi Kim Hua, one of the most remembered veterans, led a platoon tasked with repairing routes under constant threat. When U.S. aircraft bombed during the day, they waited for the ground to stop shaking. Then, at night, they went to work. They cleared debris, dug out buried trucks, and detonated unexploded bombs by hand. Every section they rebuilt could be destroyed again by sunrise. It did not matter. They kept moving forward, trapped in a cycle of endless exhaustion and boundless courage. They lived in caves, burrows, or shelters made of palm leaves. Humidity devoured their skin. Mosquitoes fed relentlessly. Malaria, dysentery, and hunger were as deadly as the bombs themselves.
The women who lived in the jungle were very exposed to disease. They were infected with malaria more rapidly than the men. They also had specifically feminine illnesses, and then there were leeches and mosquitoes. It was a very hard life for the women. When they arrived on the trail, they all had very good skin, but when they returned home, they'd lost their hair.
To survive, they boiled roots, hunted frogs, and improvised remedies from bark and homemade ointments. When a companion died, she was buried beside the road with a bamboo plank and a wildflower. Then the column moved on. At nightfall, the distant roar of B-52 bombers made the earth tremble. In those moments, the volunteers lay flat on the ground, whispering prayers or popular songs about love and rice fields. Their strength was unity, a sisterhood born of danger and hope. Within the youth shock brigades, women were not only road repairers, they were mechanics, nurses, bomb diffusers, cooks, and leaders. Of the 138,000 volunteers, thousands never left the jungle. They died without graves or names, but their work kept supply lines flowing south. That was their greatest victory. In the south, the war took on a different face. Women with braids, scarves, and rifles blended the softness of rice with the hardness of steel. They became known as the Long-Haired Army, a name first spoken in disbelief, then embraced as a symbol of defiance. They did not hide. They fought with their hair loose in the wind, like a banner of identity. Nguyen Thi Jin, a peasant by birth and a strategist by instinct, was their most famous leader. She joined the resistance as a teenager, organized the uprisings in Ben Tre, and rose to become a general in the National Liberation Front, better known as the Viet Cong. Her strategy fused politics and warfare. Women did not merely carry weapons. They mobilized villages, spread propaganda, and built intelligence networks. In markets, messages were hidden among baskets of fruit. In temples, prayers became clandestine meetings. In rice fields, ammunition was buried beneath the grain. And all the while, they trained for combat. The South was burning. In villages such as Tra Vinh and Long An, female militias patrolled roads by day and guarded them by night. Some operated anti-aircraft guns, shooting down helicopters with remarkable precision. Others served as nurses, performing surgeries with kitchen knives under the dim light of oil lamps. During the Tet Offensive in 1968, entire female units took part in coordinated attacks, seized urban positions, and resisted for days, while the enemy believed it was fighting only men. Female courage also filled the streets. Nuns from the Ngoc Phuong Temple in Saigon led protests against the government and foreign troops. Peasant women, worn down by abuse, joined guerrilla columns with their children strapped to their backs. Many were widows before the age of 20. Still, they fought on, convinced that independence was also a form of justice. The long-haired army was an army within an army, a revolution inside the revolution. Patriotism, vengeance, love, and loss blended within its resistance. In a war shaped by men, these women proved that courage has no gender and that they could be just as relentless as anyone. In that context, American veterans still remember the fighter known as Apache.
Their job was to hunt and find us. Normally, the Viet Cong would kill the Marine, steal the shoes or whatever else that they needed of his equipment. But the Apache was very sadistic.
Anything to cause excruciating pain. And the more severe and vicious the torture, the better.
History, then, was also written with braids caked in dust and blood, while explosions thundered in the background. The air war turned Vietnam into a hell visible from the sky. More than 7 million tons of bombs fell across the country, destroying villages, crops, and mountains. For women in the north and central regions, survival became routine. Volunteers learned to read engine sounds. They could distinguish a B-52 by its deep roar and an F-105 by its sharper whistle. When the sky fell silent, they knew it was time to run. Along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, explosions were constant. Out of 16 in my platoon, 10 died, one veteran later recalled. Death became a familiar presence, almost domestic, accepted with sorrow and stubborn resolve. But bombs were not the only horror. Beginning in 1962, the United States sprayed millions of liters of chemical defoliants, the most infamous being Agent Orange. Its goal was to strip jungles bare and destroy crops.
Their purgatory lasted for 8 years, an incessant deluge of bombs, chemical weapons, and napalm.
The dioxin-laden chemicals burned skin and poisoned the land. In villages, women found their crops dead, rivers contaminated, and bodies covered in sores. Many suffered infertility, miscarriages, or lifelong illness. Even today, children and grandchildren are born with deformities, unwilling heirs to an invisible poison. In the north, factories moved underground and hospitals were camouflaged among rice fields. Women sustained that entire system. They managed weapons production, cooked for battalions, cared for the wounded, and, between air raid sirens, cultivated the rice that fed the nation. It is estimated that up to 70% of the food during the hardest years was produced by women. A slogan repeated in Hanoi captured the reality: more sweat in the north for less blood in the south. It was a bitter truth. While bombs fell, women kept the country alive with sweat, soil, and unbreakable faith in victory. Under the reign of napalm, resistance wore a female face.
The war was a cemetery for 1.5 million Vietnamese and for 58,000 American soldiers. The trail was a winding veil of pain and suffering that still afflicts the tens of thousands of volunteers. And peace was but an unworthy mother to the daughters who returned weakened, diseased, and wounded. Having sacrificed their youth for the cause, they did not know they would also sacrifice their womanhood.
Eventually, peace arrived. But when the gunfire faded and the helicopters left, many women discovered that victory did not include them. They returned to devastated villages, exhausted land, and homes where no one waited. Some had lost entire families. Others came back carrying invisible wounds, sick from Agent Orange or scarred by malnutrition. For years, many were labeled undesirable for marriage. The war, people said, had hardened them.
We were at the heart of the war. And after every bombing raid, we had to start rebuilding everything again. What we endured back then affected us deeply and still does today. Because when we came back to our villages, we were no longer eligible for marriage. And so in terms of a family, we were less fortunate than the women who had never gone away.
In villages such as Ninh Binh, veterans still remember the loneliness of returning home. They slept in half-destroyed houses. They farmed rice with legs mutilated by mines or hands deformed by burns. Some hid their scars beneath scarves, ashamed. The society they had defended with their bodies did not always know how to honor them. Their names faded into anonymity, overshadowed by uniformed heroes. Recognition came late. Sometimes it was a small monument, a brief ceremony, a portrait in a school hallway, or a medal pinned to an elderly woman in a wheelchair. In the South, the transition was even more painful. Alongside post-war confusion came the tragedy of Operation Babylift, during which thousands of children were separated from their mothers and sent abroad as so-called war orphans. Behind every flight were women desperately searching for children who never returned. Some spent decades writing letters to orphanages in Europe and the United States, hoping to trace a name or a photograph. Despite peace, many women kept fighting. Nguyen Thi Binh, who helped negotiate the Paris Peace Accords, became a symbol of this new stage, diplomacy as a continuation of resistance. Others turned to teaching, unions, agricultural cooperatives, or veterans organizations. Today, some of these women live in rebuilt villages. Others live only in memory, in a country that is finally beginning to listen. They say they did not fight for glory, but for dignity, that when planes returned, they did not think of fear, but of the land. Their greatest victory was survival. Because the end of the war did not bring rest, but it did bring certainty. Without them, Vietnam would not have been reborn. Without these women, Vietnam's history would have unfolded very differently. The Ho Chi Minh Trail would not have pulsed. Villages would not have resisted. The country would have lacked food, endurance, and a voice. They were the silent engine of the war and the lifeblood of victory. Yet for decades, their names were erased from the official narrative. dissolved into dust and silence. Now their faces return through portraits, museums, and testimonies that restore memory. Because in every stretch of that war, on the trail, in the jungle, and in the cities, there was a woman holding the nation together. This brings us to the end. If you enjoyed this video, we invite you to join us in our next episode as we continue exploring military history.